Hello and welcome to a special programme here on CGTN towards a green future. We're marking 50 years of diplomatic relations between China and the European Union by looking at how the two have worked and can work together to facilitate the green transition worldwide. CGTN Europe has commissioned a special report powering the twin engines navigating China-EU climate cooperation. And here to reveal its key findings is one of its co-authors, Dr. Chiara Antonelli from the Institute for European Environmental Policy.
We really see that there is still space and importance to enhance multilateralism and mutual understanding, I would say, from both sides, especially on climate action, as said before. There is importance to strengthening and encouraging also harmony, I would say, between climate frameworks and especially looking at international climate finance. As has been said before, the importance and the relevance of looking also at third countries is necessary in capacity building. Collaboration and cooperation on research and innovation is key. And that specifically looks at topics like clean technology, energy storage, and let's not forget that circular economy. I would also like to make the point that, as has been repeated several times today, climate adaptation is something really important to look at together. So encouraging these efforts toward adaptation, especially bringing on board nature-based solutions and similar approaches should be envisaged by both and jointly. As Bin just mentioned before, we're talking about two philosophers that were talking about, let's say, harmony between human and nature. Well, let's say that this is what we should aim at when looking at this joint leadership that could bring a stronger global climate processes together. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're also joined now by Karl Falkenberg, the former Director General for Environment at the European Commission, and also a great pleasure to welcome Nick Mabey, CEO and co-founder of the independent climate think tank E3G. Joining us virtually from London, I hope, is Jiangwen Guo, a Senior Research Fellow from the Environment and Society Centre at Chatham House. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel, would you give them a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. Let me begin, if I might, with Karl, please. We'll dive into more detail on the recommendations of this report in just a few moments, but I just want to refer back to the panel. We've still got the question and the results on the poll that we took earlier. Do these results surprise you? Let me just remind you the question, what's the most powerful driver of societal climate action today? And out in front by 57%, government-led policies and regulations. So that, it's surprising?
It is surprising, but I think it is due to the audience here. And
they're all pointy-head, well-informed activists,
that we have.
That's what you're saying.
Perhaps it's also the fact that this is Brussels.
Yep.
I think Brussels understands the value of regulation. And so this result is not a surprise, and I would actually sign up to it. But, I have a little but. The government-led policies and regulations are essential, but they give the impression that we can solve these problems, each one of us, at home. And that's just completely beside the point. Europe is still emitting a rough 7% of greenhouse gas emissions, even if we became perfect with regulation. And we're in 2 years down to zero. The rest of the world continues emitting 93%, will continue, and the planet will become a sauna. We have already exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there is an urgency to actually get the number one and the number two together. And I'm not quite sure whether international cooperation in the end shouldn't have come top, because we need to understand that we have to not just work in our respective areas, but we have to work together. And that means that at the end of the day, for Europe, my deep conviction It's more important that we show a model, that we show solutions that can be replicated by others. We need to think about showing examples that others will want to replicate, because it gives you economic development, it gives you jobs, it gives you a fair amount of shared wealth on this planet.
Let's bring in Jiangwen Guo. Is that how you see it? All of these factors are important, aren't they?
Yeah, I fully agree. All of them are important. However, maybe a little bit different than just Karl mentioned that. So in my view, so like the government governance and the policies and the individual actions, and also, for example, some other engagement, let's say they are the essential pillars to a building, including the international cooperation. However, each of them has their own focuses. So on the other hand, I would like to emphasize that because the climate change is a common challenging for everyone. It's not the challenging for each individual country, either nor to the individual person. So that's meaning whatever the target, for example, 1.5 degree or 2 degree, whatever it is. So that is a common goal for everyone, for every country. So for everyone, so for all countries. So that's meaning that implies that the international cooperation is essential, because we have to have a joint effort to address climate change so that we can work together to tackle this common goal. So that's my view. Thank you.
Dr. Antonelli, the key recommendation of the report, it seems to me, is enhancing strategic communication and perhaps mutual understanding between China and the EU. How might that happen?
That's a very important question, actually, to put on the table. I think there are several channels that should be used. So first of all, high-level communication and high-level discussion is essential. And this does not refer necessarily or exclusively just to a mere dialogue. So we have there already the high-level discussion as an international platform on exchanges on environment and climate, and yet we still should, we should further institutionalize this sort of exchanges, make them more structured, transparent, and action-oriented. But these should also go beyond policymakers and policy officers. They should also include broader participation from people. If we think, for instance, about initiatives like city-to-city partnerships, these are very interesting opportunities also to have sistering cities, I would say. And this could also be encouraged through business innovation fora, where this could actually be used as a co-joint innovation hub. And we have also informal dialogue. So track 2, for instance, is an example of that. But more informal dialogues, especially between researchers and, but also civil societies in both regions, should be taken seriously in consideration and to deepen more.
Let's bring Nick in here. I mean, you specialize in climate diplomacy and foreign policy. Do you see a better path to better understanding between China and the EU? We seem to be doing more discord around the world than dialogue at the moment.
I think you have to look at two levels. So it's true, the people-to-people engagement between Europe and China has massively dropped off since COVID, and all of the things in the report have been going on for decades, and we've been a strong part of that. We need to rebuild that. That's great. But actually, even with that, Europe and China, 70% of the global clean economy between them, first driven by European renewable subsidies that incentivized the Chinese renewable industry, have grown global clean investment from 400 billion in Paris, 2015, to 2.1 trillion last year. They didn't need us to do cooperative workshops on that. What they needed is to build economic confidence and investment. And that's what we need going forward. And I think one of the things I would say, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. And I think Europe and China need to build extraordinary confidence in the clean markets they have developed and grown, because what we're hearing in a poll today on business executives saying their biggest lack of confidence, reason why their business won't grow in clean energy, is political uncertainty. They need to send a signal at the summit this year of that continuing process. There's lots of concrete things you can do, but fundamentally, we've grown it together. We need to incentivize it and drive it forward together. And that is a much kind of deeper sign of collaboration than kind of the talking, which is great, is actually, are we doing together? Are we aligned?
I want to drill down with Karl on this. I mean, the green transition can't just be based on policy, can it really? I mean, any agreements between China and the EU need practical applications. I mean, as former Director General of the Environment at the European Commission, how hard is it to move from talk to action?
That's the real challenge of governance, and I guess it's the real challenge for anyone who sits in governance. Governments can talk to each other. They can decide frameworks through regulation and give direction, as Nick was saying, and I think that's important. But it needs to be then taken up by concrete actions, and that's where I think we need to have communication. We need to talk. We need to show examples. I'm very much more believing, as I already said in my first reaction, in showing things that work, because they will be replicated by others. When we started investing, or asking our industry to invest in solar energy, when we asked to invest in wind energy, a lot of people were looking at us and saying, "What are you doing? You're going to get out of this world." I mean, lack of competitiveness, complete disaster for industrial situations in Europe, etc., etc. China began to look at this and said, "Hey, this is a cheap form of energy, and if you can produce cheap form of energy, you're going to become more competitive and not less competitive." And so China went into this and picked it up and overtook us. China now has more investments in solar and in wind than we in Europe, and even better, holds more patents in solar and in wind. So we need to really come back and strongly give the indication to our own societies that, hey, we launched early a direction, we still believe in it. What we do in reality, and here in Brussels you know it, we have been talking about the Green Deal and putting it at the top of what we wanted to achieve in Europe, and suddenly we do a Clean Industrial Act. And no one is quite clear in his mind, what is this Clean Industrial Act? Is it a U-turn away from Green Deal? Or is it just a way of showing that the Green Deal is also valid in industrial policies, and that the industrial policies have to become green, and that it will actually be competitive if they become green?
Chiara, here's something else we need to sort out. Joint research, presumably, and innovation, which are both going to be key to the green transition. I mean, what are the real opportunities for EU and China to work together? And aside from this report that we've done, obviously the perfect example of EU-China working together, is this already happening?
I would say that the perfect example is yet to come, of course. I must say that there are some interesting opportunities and some interesting initiatives already there. For instance, there's the China-EU co-funding mechanisms that has actually funded several projects, mostly on energy storage and biofuels. There are also initiatives in member states with a Sino-German track to dialogue. There's the China-France Carbon Center. But I think there's still quite some room there for improvement, let's say. And there are specific topics or sectors where we could actually act together. For instance, on urban climate resilience, both regions have been highly and widely affected by extreme weather events, and as such there is definitely room to work together. For instance, also merging missions, EU mission cities with relevant and related China's initiatives. We also have, I think, room for improvement on agricultural adaptation as well, and for sure circularity and critical raw materials are something that are quite high among our priorities. For instance, harmonization and circularity metrics would something that would be really helpful for both of us, and also in order to push it forward for multilateralism, as well as investigating more on industrial symbiosis models. That's just
demands on climate finance are very different from developed countries like those in the EU and developing countries like China, aren't they?
Yeah, though we still face the challenge of retooling our whole financial system to invest in this new economy. It's very different to the old economy in scale and business model. And actually, an area where China and Europe have co-designed and built is the new market regulations for its taxonomies, green bond markets. Actually, China was ahead on some, Europe moved up, especially through the Trump 1 presidency, they kept that momentum going. And again, back to investor confidence, I think if Europe and China, working with London and Singapore and other major financial, Tokyo, really committed, make sure we committed to carrying forward things the US has rolled back on in terms of integrating climate into financial market regulation, and go forward at the IMF and the Basel Committee and others to keep the momentum going that we're going to put climate on a balance sheet. We're going to align our investment and our incentives in macroeconomics and in financial markets around this transition. That will be part, along with things like ambitious NDCs, of giving the large pools of capital, which we need to move and accelerate into this area, the confidence that's going forward. Because they've suffered a shock of the US pulling back. But the US is 15% of the global clean energy economy. That's 2 years, under 2 years of growth. We can overcome that speed bump, but we need to be ambitious in the way we align and retool our system. Because at the moment, what I'm hearing, everybody's hearing what the Americans are doing. They're not hearing what Europe and China are doing as the people who own the low-carbon economy, that they are investing in the future, back to Karl's point. So that's getting above the noise level is one of the ways we have to do that, and being bold.
Now, thank you for getting back to Karl's point, because I want to get at one of Karl's points. Karl, if international agreement is going to improve, do we need to rethink gatherings like the COP summits? I hate to quote people's words back at them, and this is very unkind, but you were quoted earlier this year saying, and these are your words, not mine, Karl Falkenberg, the COP system is not in good shape. So what needs to change, and how can China and the EU work together to change it? You did say that, didn't you? Just to be, I just want to check.
I stand by what I said.
Okay, good, fine.
I stand by what I said. I'm not running away from
it.
Okay. I had the pleasure or the pain of participating in 2009 in a Copenhagen COP, so I have life experience of the circus, as I call it. I just don't honestly believe that it is something that is efficient in working, to have so many delegations and so many spectators around in one environment. I remember difficulties of actually getting to a negotiating room because the corridors were so filled with spectators, with NGOs, with businesses, with all sorts of journalists, yes, you name them. And it just, for a negotiator, it was literally difficult to get to a place where he was supposed to do his duty. If I look at climate change more narrowly, I mean, what I say goes for biodiversity, goes for basically all of these international conferences. What we need is those people that are mainly concerned can get together and try to solve the problem. I could imagine a situation where mitigation would be solved by, I'll take a number, 30 major emitters. They would probably cover 95 to 98% of our emissions. Not 180 countries, but just 30. Take the biggest. They are the ones that need to get together and actually take these decisions. On mitigation, on adaptation, I can concede that more countries would want to have a say, because they all are feeling the effects of climate change. But we need to find rooms where those that are literally mainly concerned by an issue have a place where they can negotiate without being watched or disturbed or whatever by people who actually can contribute very little.
Okay, you fixed COP. Congratulations. What an extraordinary achievement to have come out of this afternoon. You fixed COP. Let's talk at more solutions. Dr. Chiara, we've talked a lot about innovation. We wouldn't be doing our duty if we didn't bring up artificial intelligence. No conference or news program, of course, is complete without talking about artificial intelligence. How do you see artificial intelligence helping in the fight against climate change? Does it, or is it irrelevant?
I would say that there's a very delicate balance to strike here with climate change and artificial intelligence, because of course artificial intelligence, AI, is a very relevant and powerful tool, especially if you think, for instance, on more accurate weather forecasts and preparedness and responsiveness to that, but also in generally monitoring and improving renewable deployment of renewable energy as well as energy systems, or even monitoring better the circularity ladder and as such reducing landfill waste and then GHG emissions. But at the same time, we have to be very much aware of the fact that this brings also an important consumption of electricity. Electricity demand is going to rise and is rising quite a lot because of this. This also means building additional data centers, and this also creates disruptions, of course, and many more environmental risks. So, of course, there are many pros for the use of AI in the fight against climate change and adaptation, but at the same time we have to be very much aware of the risks. So it's important to carefully assess and try as much as possible to absorb them in our models, let's say, in our actions when we use them.
Jiangwen Guo is nodding her head there. Jiangwen Guo, as quoted in our report at the 4th China-EU high-level environmental and climate dialogue, it was stated that green is the distinctive colour of China-EU cooperation, and our report goes on calling the two sides twin engines of global climate leadership. How do we ensure it stays that way?
Like you just mentioned, the reason I just keep on nodding is because I fully echo that the AI does bring both the opportunities and the challenges for us to helping us to tackle the climate change. And just as you mentioned that in the paper it's two engines. So that's meaning, as you just mentioned, as we have been talking whole this afternoon, even the geopolitics context. So there are a lot of uncertainties. Then among all of these uncertainties, EU and China, it could go further in tightened cooperation. That provides a very unique certainty among the uncertainties. I think that is important, especially nowadays.
Nick, I cut you off, and I know you were trying to get in, so I'm going to give you a couple of moments just to say what you were going to contribute earlier.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Karl. We did in 2009 as well. My first COP.
Why be respectful? Just disagree.
Because I'm always respectful in public, anyway. My first COP was 1997 in Kyoto. I've been to most of them, and you went to the Aberration COP, which was really badly run as a diplomatic project. Sorry, Denmark. But everybody's told you that already. The fact is that the circus is what makes us deliver. Actually, one of the things Europe and China agrees is you shouldn't sew up a mitigation treaty without those countries most impacted by it in the room. And we generally agreed on that to keep the US from trying to do that. Because that was, when the US was the world's largest emitter, it really wanted to have a mitigation-only treaty without the vulnerable countries. That was a geopolitical decision, which I still think is the right one. I was involved in making that when Bush drew out of the Kyoto Protocol. So I think we've got to look at this. This has actually been a really massive diplomatic success. Actually, EU-China has been a massive diplomatic success. We do need it to pick up the momentum. And I think we'll come back. I do think resilience, grid management, lots of very practical things to do. But if the real challenge for Europe and China is can they get investment to the rest of the emerging economies? And that's an area they've failed to work on in the past. And I think that's one of the frontier areas we need to come. And Karl can object to my climate diplomacy analysis. But again, I must admit, I don't think any of the agreements I've been in those rooms would have happened without the circus. If you're a well-managed circus, I was advisor to Glasgow, so badly managed circus, I agree, disruptive. Well-managed circus, pressure on governments to do what their citizens want. if you use it well, the circus can be a really powerful diplomatic tool.
In one sentence, the circus.
I still think that when you say that the circus has been effective, look at reality. We are overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are on nowhere of a pace where we need to go. We are into a hot world, because all of these emissions that we have sent up there will be there for the next 40 to 60 to 80 years. And if you look at these curbs and the necessity to actually bring them down, we are really not at pace with the ambition that we declare. And I still find it, yeah, but I've,
It's not the NGOs who did that, it's the government's decided not to meet those
But
goals.
a convention that says we want to maintain 1.5 and then makes national commitments that add up to 3.5 degree warming, I mean, how can anyone call this a success?
We're going to move on, because you two will never agree, and it's wonderful to watch. Ladies and
More
gentlemen,
interesting than the usual Brussels
yeah,
debate.
no, terrific, fascinating stuff. We will give you your own programme. Ladies and gentlemen, another of the key recommendations of this report is that young people in China and the EU really need to come together to work for a greener future. It's a great pleasure to see Karl Obermann here, the filmmaker and photographer and biodiversity expert. Karl, I know you've spent ages traveling and filming in China, some of it with young people. I wonder what, it's a terrible generalization to talk about young people, but in terms of the experience that you had talking to young people, what were their thoughts on climate change?
On the whole, about 90% of people in China do believe that climate change is human-caused, and they're very supportive of government climate action. When we think about young people, these are people that grew up in a generation where they saw the transition from air pollution being a very massive issue to that being cleaned up through government policies, regulation, and transition to EVs, e-bikes, and electrification of the economy. And so young people have a very high optimism for what the government can do and what technology can do. What's also interesting is that they have a very optimistic partake on what they can do as individuals, which is interesting looking at the poll, and they don't have a lot of vitriol against large companies, which is you see in the West. And the last point I will make, which is very relevant to discussion today, is they are frustrated about Western historical emissions. Although China has now passed the EU in terms of historical CO2 emissions, the United States, of course, is still ahead. But when you look at per capita historical emissions, the average person in the US has a 7 times higher emission rate than a Chinese person, and the EU is 3 times higher. And they are very frustrated about, and so addressing that historical gap is going to be very important when you think about talking to Chinese youth and engaging them on climate change.
Let's talk about solutions. So given all of that and your experiences traveling and talking and filming people, what do you think would help bring young people, not just in China, but frankly all around the world, together to fight climate change?
You know, I'm saying this, yes, in the backdrop of what the Trump administration is doing and tariffs, and we're seeing kind of a closing global order. But for young people, we talk about human exchange, technological exchange, and idea exchange, open borders, open communication and trade is so important. And also language. I know that, yes, we're in an AI era, you can translate anything you want, but really learning a language beyond the lingua franca, beyond English, learning Mandarin, actually taking the time to connect culturally is how productive discussions on a human level and productive agreements get made.
Thank you all for coming, especially my sincere thanks to all of our panelists, Dr. Chiara Antonelli, Jiangwen Guo, Nick Mabey, and Karl Falkenberg. Would you give them a round of applause, please? The launch of CGTN Europe's report, Powering the Twin Engines, Navigating China-EU Climate Cooperation. To read the report, do head to our website or scan the QR code below on your screen. But for now, from me, Jamie Owen, and all of the team here in Brussels, it's goodbye.